Hi, my name is Meg Hyland, and I'm here today to talk to the Anster Improvements Association about the topic of women's work song in the Scottish fishing industry. So some of you may remember I gave a talk about this as part of the Anster Nicht program in 2016, so 4 years ago now. And at the time, I had just completed a summer research project looking at the role of music in the fishing industry in general. But last year, I completed a master's at the University of Edinburgh looking specifically at Gaelic songs that women sang while gutting fish. The women who worked as herring gutters would travel from the Hebrides all around the coast of Scotland down to East Anglia, and they would travel in groups from their island. And when they'd gather around the farlin, which if you don't know, that's the wooden trough where the herring was put in, the fish for them to gut. And when they would gather around it, sometimes they would sing while they were working. And so what I did during my master's was I went through the School of Scottish Studies archive in Edinburgh, where they have sound recordings going back to the 1940s. And I found examples of these songs and analyzed their lyrics, which are in Gaelic, to see what the women were singing about, why they sang while they worked, that sort of thing. So today I'm just going to be talking about one of the common themes in these women's gutting songs, and that's housing. So the period of time we're looking at here is from about the 1870s to the 1940s. That was really the heyday of the herring gutting. It had gone on earlier than that in the 19th century, but it wasn't until around the 1870s that Hebridean women started participating in large numbers. And at the beginning of that period, the most common type of house in the Hebrides was what's called the black house, or in Gaelic, an taidu. If you haven't seen one in person, it's usually made of turf with a thatched or turf roof, and it's all one room usually. And it's the kind of house that's built to protect you from the winds and from the elements, more than being built like with necessarily modern comforts in mind. So the women who left the Hebrides in the late 19th and early 20th century to work in the herring industry, when they traveled around Scotland, they noticed that other people's houses were not like this. And we have several songs from the herring gutters where they'll sing, for example, in one of them they'll say, "Where are the sailors? They're dancing with the pretty girls in the white houses of Lerwick in Shetland." And they'd also sing about places on the Scottish mainland where they saw these white houses, an Taigyal in Gaelic. And just to give you an example of some of the lyrics, here's one of the songs. I'll sing a little bit of it and then translate it. Scanetairam bitu vamitu laviaka machtagyal asim bibus carpatur fomachasin. And that means it's not a thatched house that I was hoping to have, but a white house with a shop attached and a carpet under my feet. So that was sung by Mary Morrison of Barra, probably sometime in like the 1920s. And there's a couple details there, right? She doesn't want a thatched roof. She wants a white house, the type where you'd see a shop in front of it, and she wants a carpet. And the flooring of the houses is something that comes up in other songs too. For example, our oldest example of a song like this is from the 1880s. It was recorded being sung by a woman called Nan McKinnon. And she was from Battersea, which is a small island near Barra. And her mother had been a herring gutter in the 1880s, and so she recorded this song in the 1950s and said her mother had learned it as a gutter. And in this one, she says, O gwyl mo lenansa a tok tai gal yosa, gwyl lota cruyaun agus starchen an orten. And that means, well, my lover is building a white house for me. There's a wooden floor in it and orderly stairs. So you can see there's this preoccupation with the floors. Obviously in a black house, it's more of like a dirt or sod floor. So these women, when they would travel and see these houses with wooden or carpeted floors, that was something that they were interested in bringing back to the Hebrides. And I think it was really interesting to find examples of this in these songs, because the transition from the black houses to the whitewashed houses was considered, it's considered kind of a loss of Hebridean culture, that the traditional style of black house has declined. But it's interesting because here we have like some evidence of women wanting this change, and they're fluent in Gaelic. For them, it's not about losing their culture. It's just they traveled and saw houses that they thought would be more hospitable to live in. And so they sing about how when their boyfriend is done with the fishing, they want him to come home and build them a house like that. And it's really interesting to have the women's perspective in this, because this idea of these expectations on men to upgrade their houses in the early 20th century is something that Gaelic men have written about in short stories. And there's one by Ian Morach about, it's a very kind of depressing, dour story about how his wife is always nagging him because after the war, he promised her, the First World War, he promised her that he'd build her a new white house with a wooden floor, but he's so racked with post-traumatic stress disorder from the war that he hasn't been able to do it. So it's quite a sad story about how being unable to complete this house for his wife is really symbolic about his inability to move forward in the modern world because of the trauma he's been through. So, when I was studying at Edinburgh, we read that in my short story class in Gaelic, but then it was really interesting to see the women's perspectives. A lot of times they sing about how the whitewashed houses will be cleaner, so that they and their loved ones don't get sick as easily. I can't speak to the hygiene of black houses. I don't know how accurate that is, but it's certainly something that they sing about a lot. And then on the more kind of playful side, one of the songs, the one I sang a little excerpt of earlier, that's a song about a couple trying to court and visit each other. But in the black house, everything's in one room. And so when they're trying to have their rendezvous, an old woman comes into the house and kind of spoils the moment. So the implication is that she'd like a house where you can have a little more privacy. So as you can see, there's a real variety of things they would sing about in these songs. That's just one example. But I hope it gives you an idea of how music, which these women wrote and improvised themselves, can really give you a lot of insights into the time period it was written in. These women's work songs have not really been studied much, so it gives us some unique insights into their mindsets, because these songs were just improvised as snapshots of whatever was going on in their life then, and then many years later when the women were elderly, they remembered it and recorded it, but at the time it was written, it was this sort of ephemeral thing. So it gives us a great snapshot into their lives. Anyway, thank you for listening. I hope you're all surviving the lockdown okay, and have a great day.